Colonel Timur Akhmetov arrived at a high mountain outpost in the TIAN Shan 2 days after receiving a coded telegram marked Special Importance. An Mi-8 helicopter dropped him and a 5-man engineering team off at an altitude of 3,800 meters, where the air is so thin that every movement requires effort. The border outpost commander, Major Iskandar Raimov, met them at the helipad with a report. 10 days earlier, a patrol had discovered a structure in a rock crevice that wasn't marked on any map. Akhmetov asked for coordinates, and Raimov handed over a tablet with a topographic survey. It showed a perfectly rectangular outline, 20 meters wide and 15 meters high, oriented strictly along the north-south axis, embedded in the mountain massif. The group was accompanied by 2 border guards, Sergeant Muratov and Private Bekmambetov, both locals who had known the mountains since childhood. The climb to the site took 4 hours along a narrow goat trail that ended at a vertical wall of grey granite. Raimov pointed out a crack in the rock, a barely noticeable crevice, 1.5 meters wide, hidden by a rock overhang, so that from any angle except a direct approach, it blends in with the natural unevenness. Akhmetov ordered the field lighting to be deployed, and the spotlights illuminated the interior of the crevasse. Beyond 5 meters of natural rock, a worked surface began, perfectly smooth walls of dark stone, not granite, but something denser, with a metallic sheen. The group's chief engineer, Captain Oleg Savitsky, took initial measurements and reported, the walls had been worked with an unknown tool, with no traces of chisel, drill, or blasting. The surface was polished to a mirror finish, but did not reflect light normally. The image within it was blurred, as if the stone were absorbing some of the light. Akhmetov ordered rock samples taken, and Savitsky attempted to chip a fragment with a diamond drill, but the tool slipped without leaving a scratch. The second engineer, Lieutenant Yaroslav Kovalev, suggested the rock had been treated with some kind of hardening compound, but chemical analysis revealed pure rock without impurities. Akhmetov gave the order to enter. The crevasse opened into a 3-meter-wide corridor that descended into the mountain at a 5-degree angle. The group walked 50 meters, unwinding the marker rope, and the corridor suddenly widened, leading into a space the searchlights couldn't fully illuminate. Akhmetov ordered a flare to be launched, and in the red light of the flare, everyone saw a chamber at least 30 meters high and about 40 meters wide opened before them. A rectangular opening gaped in the far wall of the chamber, a gate 20 meters wide and 15 meters high, framed by massive blocks of the same dark stone, decorated with geometric patterns without a single pictorial element. Raimov reported that the patrol had only reached this hall and not gone any further. Akhmetov asked why, and the major replied that the men had refused, not out of fear, but because of physical discomfort. 3 of the 4 had felt a sudden weakness and dizziness upon approaching the gate. Akhmetov checked the dosimeter. The radiation levels were normal. He ordered Savitsky to set up a base camp in the hall with a generator and lighting, and he himself approached the gate. Beyond the threshold, darkness began, absolute and dense, pierced by the spotlight's light only for 3 meters. Akhmetov threw a stone into the opening. There was no sound of impact. He ordered Kovalev to measure the depth beyond the gate with an echo sounder, and the device showed no reflective surfaces within range. The next day, Akhmetov organized a reconnaissance of the space beyond the gate. A group of 4 men, himself, Savitsky, Kovalev, and Sergeant Muratov, entered the threshold, unwinding a 300-meter safety rope. The first 10 meters were in complete darkness, Then the corridor began to widen, and spotlights illuminated the walls, the same polished blocks, the same mirrored surface. After 50 meters, the corridor opened into another room, smaller but with 3 doorways in different walls. Akhmetov ordered the route they had taken to be marked with reflective markers, and Muratov attached the first marker to the wall near the entrance. The group chose the central opening and continued on. The next section turned out not to be a corridor, but a staircase descending at a 30-degree angle. The steps were high, about 40 centimeters, clearly not designed for human stride. The descent took 20 minutes, and the rope expired halfway down. Akhmetov decided to continue without the safety rope, recording the coordinates of the last anchor point. The staircase led to a circular hall about 50 meters in diameter, with a domed ceiling decorated with the same geometric patterns. In the center of the hall stood a monolithic cube-shaped block, 2 meters on a side, with no visible fastenings or seams. Savitsky attempted to walk around the cube, but stopped halfway and reported that the compass had stopped working. The needle was spinning freely, without fixing its direction. Kovalev checked his own compass. A compass, and confirmed the anomaly. Akhmetov ordered the direction of the exit to be visually recorded, memorizing the position of the doorway relative to the cube, and the group walked around the hall, examining the walls. Muratov discovered 4 additional exits, located symmetrically around the circumference of the hall, all identical in size and shape. Akhmetov ordered the entrance they had entered to be marked, and Muratov attached a second reflective tag to the wall near the doorway. The group returned to the stairs but discovered the tag had disappeared. The wall was empty, with no signs of attachment. Akhmetov checked the remaining 4 openings. All appeared identical, all leading into darkness. He ordered them to enter each one in turn, 5 meters deep, and record the corridor's features. Savitsky and Muratov checked 2 openings and returned with a report. Both led to staircases, identical in design. Kovalev checked the 3rd and discovered a horizontal corridor, but he insisted it was the same one they had come through. Akhmetov entered the 4th opening himself and saw a staircase descending rather than ascending, even though they were at the lowest point of the route. The group chose the opening Kovalev had identified as the entrance and began their ascent. The staircase ended after 15 minutes, but it led not to a small hall with 3 doorways, but to another space, a long corridor flanked by columns. The columns were square in cross-section, 2 meters at the base, rising to a height of 10 meters, and supporting a ceiling of solid stone slabs. Akhmetov stopped the group and ordered them to turn toward the exit, but behind them was a blank wall. The staircase had disappeared. Savitsky began testing the wall with his hands, tapping on the surface, but the stone was solid, without seams or hidden openings. Akhmetov decided to continue along the corridor until he discovered an alternative exit. The group passed 20 columns, and the corridor ended with a massive gate, an exact replica of the one that stood in the first hall at the entrance to the complex. Akhmetov realized they had either returned to the beginning or the structure was repeating itself. He ordered them through the gate, and the group found themselves not in the familiar hall containing the base camp, but in a new space, a vast plaza under a non-existent sky. The plaza stretched for several hundred meters in all directions, paved with the same dark stone slabs. Buildings stood along its perimeter, tall, massive, windowless, with flat roofs and rectangular doorways. The sky above the plaza glowed with an even white light, without sun, without clouds, without gradation of brightness from the horizon to the zenith. The light emanated from everywhere simultaneously, creating no shadows. Akhmatov glanced at his watch. It had stopped. Savitsky checked his. Same problem. Everyone had frozen at the same time. Kovalev tried to use the radio to contact base camp, but the airwaves were dead, with no static. Muratov pointed to the nearest building and suggested they inspect it from the inside. Akhmatov agreed, and the group approached the entrance, a doorless, 3-meter-high opening leading into a dark chamber. Inside, they found a hall with rows of stone benches facing a raised platform at the far wall. On the raised platform stood another monolithic cube, identical to the one seen in the circular hall. Akhmatov ordered a full inspection of the building, and the group discovered 10 rooms on the first level, all empty, all with the same layout. A staircase led to the second level, which contained another 20 rooms, also empty. On the third level, there was one large room with a series of niches in the walls, each the size of a man. Savitsky approached one of the niches and discovered a layer of dust several millimeters thick inside. He took a sample and noticed that the dust wasn't ordinary, but metallic, with a golden hue. Kovalev checked other niches, the same dust, the same layer everywhere. Akhmatov tried to determine the age of the deposits, but without lab analysis, this was impossible. He ordered them to return to the square and inspect the next building. The group descended and exited through the same doorway, but found themselves not in the square, but in a narrow alley between two buildings. Muratov panicked and ran back to the doorway, but beyond the threshold, there was not a staircase, but a blank wall. Akhmatov ordered them to remain calm and move along the alley until they reached an open space. The group walked 50 meters, and the alley ended in a dead end. The walls were smooth, without doors or windows. Savitsky suggested going back and trying a different direction, but when they turned around, the alley continued the same way in both directions, with no sign of a dead end behind them. Akhmatov realized that the space was changing depending on their movement. He ordered them to halt and not move, fixing their positions. The group stood still for 10 minutes, and nothing happened. Then Muratov involuntarily took a step to the side, and the alley instantly transformed. The walls parted, forming a square, not the one they'd started with, but a new, smaller one, with 5 buildings instead of dozens. Akhmatov realized the pattern. Space responds to actions, but not intentions. By moving, they change their configuration. By standing still, they fix it. He ordered the group to move strictly in sync, in one direction, without stopping. They walked for an hour, and the square was constantly transforming. Buildings appeared, disappeared, changed height and shape. Then the movement stopped. A solid wall rose before them, endless in both directions, without doors, without seams. Savitsky tried to turn back, but the wall was behind them too. The group was trapped in a space 3 by 3 meters, surrounded by walls on all 4 sides. Akhmatov ordered them to pound on the walls, looking for weak spots, but the stone was monolithic. Kovalev began shouting, demanding a way out, and the walls began to close in, slowly, a centimeter a minute. Muratov fell to his knees and covered his face with his hands. Akhmatov ordered him to stand, but the sergeant didn't respond. Savitsky grabbed Muratov by the shoulders and tried to lift him, but the sergeant wrenched himself free and hit his head on the wall. The blow was powerful, but there was no blood. His skin remained intact. Muratov repeated the blow, again and again, and Akhmetov realized the sergeant was trying not to injure himself, but to break through the wall with his own body. He dragged Muratov to the center of the shrinking space and ordered Savitsky to hold him. The walls continued to close in. When the distance between them was reduced to 1.5 meters, the walls stopped and began to move away. A minute later, the group found themselves in the same large square, at the same gate through which they had first entered. Akhmetov ordered the group to immediately return through the gate, but beyond the threshold lay not a corridor with columns, but a new space, a circular room 10 meters in diameter with 7 doors arranged around the circumference. In the center of the room stood a table made of the same dark stone, and on the table lay a metal plate measuring 30 by 40 centimeters. Akhmetov picked up the plate. It was weightless, as if made of foil, yet as rigid as steel. A text in Russian, written in a modern font, was engraved on the plate's surface. The text read, "The structure reacts to the intention to leave. Each attempt to leave generates a new configuration. The only way out is to refuse to leave. Accepting the space as a permanent location halts the transformation. We tried to leave for 23 days. Now we understand. Leaving is impossible. Staying is possible." Colonel Murat Kadyrov's group. 1957. Akhmetov read the text aloud, and Savitsky asked if it could be faked. Akhmetov replied that it was impossible. No one knew of the structure's existence until 10 days ago, and the plate had clearly been there for a long time, covered in the same golden patina as the niches in the buildings. Kovalev suggested checking all 7 doors for an exit, but Akhmetov forbade it. Each attempt would complicate the configuration. He ordered them to remain in the round room and wait for the structure to stabilize. The group sat on the floor, leaning their backs against the wall. Muratov asked what had happened to Kadyrov's group, and Akhmetov replied that they were either still inside or had disappeared. Savitsky countered that if they were still inside, why hadn't Akhmetov's group met them? Akhmetov suggested that space was infinite. It created new sections for each group, isolating them from each other. An hour later, Kovalev stood up and headed for one of the doors. Akhmetov ordered him to stop, but the lieutenant ignored him. He entered the doorway and disappeared. Akhmetov rushed after him, but beyond the threshold was a blank wall. He returned to the circular room and discovered that the door through which Kovalev had left had closed. The opening had filled with stone, as if it had never been there. There were now 6 doors. Savitsky tried to touch the place where the door had been, but the stone was solid, warm to the touch. Akhmetov realized that the structure didn't simply react to movement, it absorbed those who refused to accept the rules. Kovalev tried to leave, and the structure isolated him, creating a separate configuration for him. Akhmetov explained this to Savitsky and Muratov, and both agreed to remain where they were. They sat for another 2 hours, and nothing happened. Then Muratov began to cry quietly, without sobs, just tears streaming down his face. He said he understood. There was no escape, because there never was one. The gate wasn't an entrance, but a trap. Everything inside was designed to contain. The city wasn't abandoned, it was active, but its function wasn't life, but preservation. Savitsky stood up and walked to the table. He picked up a metal plate and tried to bend it, but the material wouldn't budge. Then he put the plate back and told Akhmetov that he was going to try to leave, despite the warning. Akhmetov asked why, if the outcome was certain. Savitsky replied that it was better to disappear while trying than to sit and wait until his strength ran out. He chose one of the 6 remaining doors and entered. The doorway closed behind him. There were now 5 doors. Akhmetov was left alone with Muratov. They sat in silence for an unknown period of time. The clock wasn't working, and their sense of time had vanished. Muratov asked what would happen if they both stayed and accepted space as a constant. Akhmetov replied that, according to Kadyrov's group's recording, the structure would stop the transformation. Muratov asked what next. Akhmetov didn't know the answer. They waited, and nothing changed. The room remained stable. The doors didn't disappear. The light didn't go out. Akhmetov realized that this was the result of acceptance, eternal stability in a space without time, without change, without an exit. Akhmetov doesn't know how much time passed when one of the 5 doors opened by itself. Behind it stood Major Raimov with a group of 10 fighters, all fully equipped, with flashlights and weapons. Raimov reported that they had been searching for Akhmetov's group for 17 days, combing the entire complex. Akhmetov asked how they had reached the circular room, and Raimov replied that they had followed a marker rope to the cliff, then moved at random until they found an open door. Akhmetov stood up, took Muratov's hand, and followed Raimov. The group exited through the door, walked down the corridor, climbed the stairs, and found themselves in the base camp hall. The generator was running, the lights were on, everything was untouched. Raimov led Akhmetov to the complex's exit, and the group emerged into a crevasse, then onto a mountain trail. Akhmetov saw daylight, felt the wind, and heard the cries of birds. They descended to the outpost, where they were met by medics and officers from the special department. Akhmetov was placed in isolation and given a full medical examination. Doctors recorded weight loss, dehydration, and signs of prolonged starvation. Akhmetov hadn't eaten for 17 days, although it felt like only a few hours. The interrogation was conducted by a major general, who didn't introduce himself. He listened to Akhmetov's report, wrote down his testimony, and showed him a dossier. It contained reports from 4 previous expeditions into the structure, dating back to 1953. All the groups had entered, but not all had left. Kadyrov's 1957 group, consisting of 2 of 8, emerged 23 days later. Both died of exhaustion within a week. They managed to transmit information about the structure's nature. It wasn't ruins, a shelter, or a storage facility. It was a trap created by an unknown civilization to isolate those with the ability to explore. Its operating principle is based on manipulating spatial perception. The structure doesn't physically change, but the way the brain interprets its configuration changes. The general explained that the structure was being studied to understand the principles of mind control. Potential applications include creating facilities for holding especially dangerous criminals or prisoners of war without physical guards. But every expedition results in losses, and the results are unpredictable. Akhmetov asked about the fate of Savitsky and Kovalev. The general replied that they hadn't been found. They were likely in isolated sections of the structure, from which return was impossible. Muratov was found in a coma. He woke up 3 days later, but remembers nothing after entering the structure. Akhmetov was transferred to a closed research institute near Moscow, where he works as a consultant on anomalous spatial objects. Officially, he is listed as missing in action in the TIAN SHAN Mountains. he is prohibited from contacting his family or traveling outside the institute. Every month, he is called in for retesting, psychological, neurological, and cognitive. Doctors are looking for signs of the structure's long-term impact on his consciousness. So far, no changes have been detected, but Akhmetov knows they are there. He sees doors where there aren't any. Not hallucinations, but the sensation of doorways in ordinary walls. Sometimes, while walking down the institute's hallway, he feels the layout has changed, a left turn instead of a right, a staircase instead of a straight section. He checks, and everything is in place, but the feeling remains. Akhmetov understands that the structure hasn't completely let go of him. It has left a trace in his perception, and this trace is activated randomly, during moments of fatigue or stress. The Institute's files contain a section on other similar objects, 17 of them across the Soviet Union, from Karelia to Kamchatka. All are hidden in hard-to-reach places, all are studied under strict secrecy, all result in losses. Akhmetov reads the reports and recognizes the same patterns: spaces that shift, structures that hold, gates that don't let go. He realizes that these aren't random artifacts, but a system, a network of traps distributed across the territory, created for an unknown purpose by an unknown creator. Every night, Akhmetov wakes up with the sensation that he's not in the Institute's room, but in a circular chamber with 7 doors. The sensation lasts a few seconds, then fades, but leaves the certainty: he's still inside. What he thought was an exit was actually another transformation. The real Akhmetov remained within the structure, accepted the space, and stopped resisting. And what emerged was a copy, created by the structure to disguise himself, so no one would look for the original. He can't prove it, can't verify it, but his confidence grows. Sometimes he approaches the door to his room, opens it, and sees not the hallway of the Institute, but a dark opening leading to infinity. He closes the door, opens it again. The hallway is still there. But next time will be different. The structure waits. It always waits. And sooner or later, the door will open for the last time, and beyond will be only the gates leading back to the city that never lets go of those who once entered.